My wife was still smoothing the lapels of her blazer when she told me she was in love with my younger brother. She'd been pacing the length of my home office for the better part of 20 minutes before the words actually came out, circling the room like she was working up to something, picking up the glass paperweight on my desk and setting it back down without looking at it. I'd been watching her from behind my monitor, not saying much. That was something she always complained about, that I never said much. She was 49 then, still striking in the way that made people do a second take at parties. Dark hair she kept shorter than most women her age, a posture that made every room feel like she'd just walked into her own event. When she finally stopped pacing and turned to face me, there was something calculated in the stillness. Like she'd rehearsed this, like she'd spent a long time deciding exactly where to stand. "I've been unhappy for years," she said. "You know that. You've always known it." I leaned back in my chair. I didn't say anything. "Soren and it's been going on longer than you probably want to know. But I'm done pretending." She lifted her chin a little. "I want a divorce, and I think you already know what that means for the company." There it was. My brother Soren had been VP of operations at Meridian Group for 8 years. I'd brought him in myself, built the company for 23 years from a two-man outfit, doing strip mall renovations to a regional developer with 46 employees and a portfolio worth close to $60 million. Soren had been struggling between jobs, 2 failed business ventures behind him, and I handed him a seat at the table because he was family, because I believed in second chances. My wife stood in my office on a Thursday afternoon and told me they were taking the company. I said, "I see." She blinked. That wasn't the reaction she'd been rehearsing for. "You don't seem surprised," she said. "I'm not. Soren said you'd try to fight it. He said you'd make this difficult." I turned back to my monitor. "You should take your things from the bedroom closet before the weekend. I'll have a locksmith here Monday." She stared at me for a long moment, waiting for something to crack. When nothing did, the composure she'd been holding slipped just slightly at the edges. "You have no idea what we've already put in motion," she said. "We've been working on this for over a year. The board knows things about how you've managed the company finances. Soren has documentation. You're going to find yourself very alone very soon." "Then there's nothing left to talk about," I said. "Drive safe." She left. I listened to her car pull out of the driveway and sat there in the dark office for a while without turning on a light. What my wife didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I'd been watching them for 14 months. It started with a procurement invoice that didn't add up. Small thing. $32,000 routed through a subcontractor we hadn't used in over 2 years. I flagged it to our accountant, who came back to me a week later with a shrug and a paper trail that somehow led nowhere clean. That was the first time I had the thought I didn't want to have about my own brother. I didn't act on it right away. I spent another 6 weeks trying to talk myself out of it. Then I hired a forensic accountant privately, a woman named Petra, who'd spent 15 years untangling white-collar fraud for a federal law firm. I told no one. What she found over the next 3 months made my stomach drop. Soren had been creating ghost vendor accounts, invoices for services Meridian never received, signed off under my digital signature, which he'd cloned from a DocuSign file I'd never thought to protect. The money had been siphoned in increments small enough to avoid automated flags. Over 18 months, the total came to just over $260,000. And it wasn't just the money. There were emails on the company server, which I had full admin access to, where Soren walked a board member named Drummond through a plan to document financial irregularities in my management of the company. The goal spelled out in plain language in a message sent from Soren's work laptop at 11:30 on a Wednesday night was to build a case for removing me as CEO and principal shareholder. Drummond would present the manufactured evidence at a special board session. Soren's attorney, who turned out to also be the company's longtime legal counsel, a woman named Lorna who I'd known for 18 years, would be standing by to advise the board on procedure. Lorna. That one I hadn't expected. I'd been at her wedding. I'd loaned her money when her father was sick and she needed to fly home. I read those emails twice, then closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen and stood at the sink for a long time without turning on the tap. By the time my wife told me on that Thursday afternoon that they'd been working on this for over a year, I had a 3-inch binder sitting in my home safe with every piece of documented evidence Petra had assembled. I had copies of the ghost invoices. I had the emails between Soren and Drummond. I had wire transfer records and a time-stamped forensic analysis of the signature cloning. I had a personal meeting already scheduled, set 2 weeks prior, with an agent in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division named Marcus Holt, who had confirmed receipt of my preliminary materials the morning my wife came home to pack her jewelry. I sat in the dark office after she left and thought about the life I'd built and what it was going to cost to protect it. Then I picked up the phone and moved the meeting up by a week. Lorna showed up at my door 2 days later. She didn't call first. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her coat was unbuttoned even though it was 40 degrees, and she had the look of someone who's been arguing with themselves the whole drive over. I let her in. "I need to explain something to you," she said. "Then explain." "What Soren's been telling you, or what you may have heard, I want you to understand my role in this was not what it looks like. He came to me last spring with what he said was a concern about company governance. He framed it as a compliance question. By the time I understood what he was actually building, I was already in it." I waited. "He told me he had something on me," she said quietly. "A complaint I'd handled for a client years ago, something I'd buried. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd go to the bar association. I was scared. I made a terrible choice." I'd known Lorna long enough to recognize the difference between genuine remorse and strategic remorse. What I was looking at was the latter. She wasn't there to apologize. She was there to see how much I knew. "You helped him structure the vendor fraud," I said. "You reviewed the signature cloning methodology and told him it was legally ambiguous rather than clearly criminal. You advised Drummond on how to present the board motion to minimize the risk of a shareholder challenge." The color left her face. "I've already filed a bar complaint," I said. "Everything I just described is in the supporting documentation. I'd suggest you find separate counsel." She sat down without being invited to. "You can't. We've known each other for 18 years. "You made your decision," I said. "I'm asking you to leave." She left. I went back to my desk and pulled up the camera feed on my home security system, the one I'd expanded 2 years ago to include the driveway and the side entrance. Watched her sit in her car for 11 minutes before pulling away. Then I opened the binder again and kept working. The board meeting was called for a Tuesday. Soren's idea, coordinated with Drummond, framed as an urgent financial review. I received the notice by email like everyone else. I confirmed my attendance and didn't say anything else. I arrived early. That was important. I wanted to be seated before anyone else came in, documents already open in front of me. Completely calm. When Drummond walked in and saw me sitting there, he hesitated so slightly that most people would have missed it. Soren walked in 2 minutes later, checked his phone, and then looked up. He was 46, lean, with the same jaw and cheekbones I saw in the mirror every morning. For a second I saw something move through his expression, not guilt, not exactly. Calculation, he was recalibrating. "Didn't know you'd be here so early," he said. "I built the company," I said. "I'm always here." The other board members filtered in. Drummond called the session to order. Soren stood up with a practiced gravity and began presenting what he called serious concerns about my stewardship of company funds. He had a slide deck. He had printed summaries. He named specific vendor payments, pulled up an invoice with my signature on it, and let the silence do the work. A few board members shifted in their seats. One woman I'd known for 12 years looked at the table and didn't look at me. I let him finish. "Are you done?" I said. Soren glanced at Drummond. "I think the documentation speaks." "I'd like to show the board something," I said. I connected my laptop to the projector. First screen. A side-by-side, forensic comparison of my actual digital signature profile against the cloned version Soren had used on the invoices. A report prepared by an independent cybersecurity firm, timestamped and notarized. Second screen. A wire transfer history, color-coded, showing every ghost vendor transaction with the source account, traced back to a routing number registered under a Shell LLC that Soren had filed in Nevada 14 months prior. Third screen. The email chain between Soren and Drummond, printed in full, including the message from Soren's company laptop at 11:30 on a Wednesday night that said, verbatim, "Once we get him out, the equity structure is already drafted." The room was very quiet. "Drummond," I said, "I have a separate packet for you regarding your personal participation in this. I'd recommend you review it before you say anything." Drummond's mouth opened and closed. The door opened. 3 people walked in. The one in front identified himself as a special agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. He said my brother's name and told him to stand up. Soren stood. He didn't do it smoothly. His chair caught on the carpet and he had to push it twice. They read him his rights. The room watched without speaking. One of the agents stepped to Drummond and told him he'd be accompanying them as well for questioning. Drummond said he wanted to call his attorney. The agent told him that was his right. I gathered my papers. The board members were still sitting there when I stood. I'll have a full financial reconciliation on your desks by end of week, I said. Everything that was misappropriated has already been traced and documented. We can begin discussing recovery and restructuring at next month's meeting. I looked at the board member who'd been staring at the table. She finally looked back. We'll be fine, I said. We built something that doesn't break that easily. I walked out. That evening my phone was full of messages from my parents. My father, 78 and still sharp but slower now than he'd been, had driven himself to my brother's apartment when he heard and found it already locked. Soren's keys surrendered as a condition of his release on his own recognizance. My mother called 4 times. I listened to the voicemails in my car outside the office, but didn't call back that night. I drove to their house the next morning. My father met me at the door. He looked like he'd aged 5 years. Tell me this isn't what they're saying, he said. I can't tell you that. My mother was in the kitchen. She didn't turn around when I came in. She stood at the counter with her hands flat on the tile and spoke to the window above the sink. You had your own brother arrested, she said. In front of his colleagues. In front of people who've known this family for decades. He stole from the company I built. He forged my signature. He tried to take everything I have. He's your brother. And I'm his, I said. That didn't seem to matter much to him. My father sat down at the kitchen table. He was a man who'd always had something to say, and he was having trouble finding it. We didn't raise you to do this to each other, he said finally. I sat down across from him. Dad, he didn't just steal money. He was going to have me removed from my own company, and then watch me try to explain fraud charges I didn't commit. He had help from Lorna. He had a member of my own board working against me. This was organized. This was something they planned for over a year. I paused. I didn't do this to our family. He did. I just refused to let him finish. My father stared at the table. My mother still hadn't turned around. I stayed for another 20 minutes, said what needed saying, and left. My wife and I met once more, in person, about 3 weeks after the board meeting. Her attorney had been negotiating with mine about the divorce settlement. She'd been staying with friends. I'd found out later that she'd assumed, when the board meeting went wrong, that she could still leverage her position as my wife into some portion of the company assets. When she understood that wasn't going to work, she requested a meeting, neutral location, a restaurant in the Pearl District that we'd liked early in our marriage. I was already there when she arrived. She was dressed as carefully as she always was, but the effort showed differently than it used to. There were lines around her eyes that I didn't remember. She sat down, ordered water, didn't look at the menu. You've made your point, she said. I wasn't trying to make a point. Then what were you trying to do? Survive, I said. She looked at me for a moment. You knew. When I came home and told you, you already knew all of it. I'd known for a while, yes. And you didn't say anything. You just sat there and let me talk. She shook her head slowly. Do you understand how strange that is? Do you understand that most people would have confronted us, or fallen apart, or done something? Most people don't have 14 months of evidence in a binder in their home safe. She was quiet. Then, I want you to know I didn't set out for it to go this far. When Soren and I, in the beginning it wasn't about the company. That was Soren's thing, his obsession. I know, I said. I read the emails. Her jaw tightened slightly. He recruited you into it, I said. You let yourself be recruited. There's a difference, and I've thought about it. But the outcome is the same. I set down my water glass. You're going to walk away from this marriage with the personal savings you had coming in, your car, and whatever you've kept in your personal account. The prenuptial agreement is clear. You're not entitled to company assets because you were never a shareholder. Your attorney knows this. That's why these conversations have been so short. I gave you 14 years. You gave me 8 good ones, I said. And then you started making different choices. I'm sorry about the 8, but I'm not sorry about what happened to the rest. She left before the food came. I sat there alone and ate my dinner and watched people walk by on the street outside. Soren's case took 18 months to move through the court system. Lorna's bar complaint resolved faster. She was disbarred 9 months after I filed. Drummond resigned from the board the week after the FBI visit and negotiated a separate deal that kept him out of prison in exchange for full cooperation and a substantial personal restitution payment. He'd profited from the scheme in ways I hadn't initially appreciated. Soren had been cutting him small percentages for years. I visited Soren once at the county facility where he was being held during trial preparation. I didn't plan to make it a habit. I went because there was something I needed to say in person. He was thinner. The facility clothes didn't suit him, and he knew it. He sat across the plexiglass from me with his arms folded and looked at me with an expression I'd seen on his face our whole lives. That particular mix of resentment and injured pride that had always been there, even when things were good between us. I'd spent years trying not to see it. I saw it clearly now. "You came to watch me in here," he said. "I came because you're still my brother." "That's rich." "It is what it is," I said. "I didn't create this situation. I want you to understand that. Whatever you told yourself about why you did this, whatever story you've been working on, about how I owed you something, about how I held you back, it's not going to hold up. Not when you look at it clearly. You brought me into that company when I had nothing," he said. "And then you left me there, VP of operations. Not partner, not equity, just enough to be useful to you. I offered you equity twice," I said. "You said you'd rather have the salary because you needed the cash now. I have those emails too." That landed. I could see it. "I came to tell you I'm not going to pursue any further civil action against you after the criminal case is settled," I said. "Whatever restitution the court orders, I'll accept. Beyond that, I'm done. But I need you to hear me say that I know exactly what you tried to do, and I need you to know that I survived it and the company survived it, and you didn't manage to take a single thing from me that was mine." I stood up. "I'll tell Mom you're doing okay." He didn't say anything. I left. 2.5 years after my wife walked into my office and told me she was leaving, Meridian Group broke ground on its largest project to date, a mixed-use development on the east side of the city, $62 million in financing, a deal I'd been building toward for almost 4 years. The mayor came to the groundbreaking. There were photographs. I stood on the dirt in a hard hat that one of my project managers insisted I wear, and I held a ceremonial shovel, and I thought about my brother and the binder in my home safe, and the 14 months of quiet watching that had made all the difference. Soren was sentenced to 6 years. He'd be eligible for parole after 4. Lorna was working as a paralegal in a small general practice office in the suburbs, the only legal adjacent work available to her without a license. I heard this from a mutual friend who mentioned it without knowing the full story. I didn't respond. My wife, my ex-wife, had started over in a smaller city about 200 miles south. She was doing something in property management, I'd been told. Single. Not unhappy by the one account I had of it, but not the life she'd been expecting either. I'd stopped keeping track. What I thought about, in the months and years after, was the moment she had stood in my office and looked at me with complete confidence that I was going to fall apart. That she and my brother had spent over a year building something they believed was airtight, and they had chosen the moment of maximum vulnerability, the announcement, the walking out, the manufactured evidence about to drop, and they had expected me to be exactly what they'd always believed I was. Slow, quiet, not paying attention. They had watched me build a company for 2 decades and still somehow never understood that paying attention was the only thing I'd ever truly been good at. A colleague asked me once, at a dinner about 6 months after the sentencing, how I had stayed so calm through all of it. I thought about it for a second before I answered. I wasn't calm, I said. I was ready. There's a difference, and it matters more than most people realize. Until the moment, it's the only thing standing between everything you've built and the people who decided quietly that it was theirs to take.